not only the president, but the splendid president of these United States.
I promised you 4 years ago that I would never lie to you, so I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt. The people of the United States have made their choice, and of course I accept that decision. But I have to admit, not with the same enthusiasm that I accepted the decision 4 years ago. I might say I have a deep appreciation of the system, however, that lets people make the free choice about who will lead them for the next 4 years. About an hour ago, I called Governor Reagan in California, and I told him that I congratulated him for a fine victory. I look forward to working closely with him during the next few weeks. We'll have a very fine transition period. I told him I wanted the best one in history. And I then sent him this telegram, and I'll read it to you. It's now apparent that the American people have chosen you as the next president. I congratulate you and pledge to you our fullest support and cooperation in bringing about an orderly transition of government in the weeks ahead. My best wishes are with you and your family as you undertake the responsibilities that lie before you, and I signed it, Jimmy Carter. I have been blessed, as only a few people ever have, to help shape the destiny of this nation. In that effort, I've had your faithful support. In some ways, I've been the most fortunate of all presidents, because I've had the daily aid of a wise man and a good man at my side. In my judgment, the best vice president anybody ever had. I've not achieved all I set out to do. Perhaps no one ever does. But we have faced the tough issues. We've stood for and we fought for, and we have achieved some very important goals for our country. These efforts will not end with this administration. The effort must go on, nor will the progress that we have made be lost when we leave office. The great principles that have guided this nation since its very founding will continue to guide America through the challenges of the future. This has been a long and hard-fought campaign, as you well know. But we must now come together as a united and a unified people to solve the problems that are still before us, to meet the challenges of a new decade. And I urge all of you to join in with me in a sincere and fruitful effort to support my successor when he undertakes this great responsibility as president of the greatest nation on earth. Ours is a special country because our vast economic and military strength give us a special responsibility for seeking solutions to the problems that confront the world. But our influence will always be greater when we live up to those principles of freedom, of justice, of human rights for all people. God has been good to me, and God has been good to this country, and I'm truly thankful. I'm thankful for having been able to serve you in this capacity, thankful for the successes that we have had, thankful that to the end you were with me in every good thing that I tried to do. There's an old Yiddish proverb that I've often thought of in the days and months that I've held this office. It says simply, God gives burdens, also shoulders. In all the days and months when I have served you and served this country, you've readily given me your shoulders, your faith, and your prayers. No man could ask any more of his friends. I've wanted to serve as president because I love this country and because I love the people of this nation.
And we love you.
I'm over. Finally, let me say that I am disappointed tonight, but I have not lost either love. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. You know, here we are. This is... You know, we're all here but one now, and he was here, but they just took him off stage. It's way past his bedtime. But let me just say first of all, this has been, well, there's never been a more humbling moment in my life. I would have been not only humbled by the extent of what has happened tonight, even if it had been the cliffhanger that all of us, I think, were expecting, it would have been the same way, but just to have had the support of the people of this country. I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith. Earlier this evening, I spoke on the phone with President Carter. He called, John Addison called, but the President pledged the utmost in cooperation in the transition that will take place in these coming months. I offered him my own cooperation. He graciously said that he wanted this to be the
Governor Reagan, we just wanted to show you what the map of the United States looks like as of 8 o'clock tonight.
Hey!
It's all yours.
All right. when that began to slide, I thought that maybe the world was going out just as I was getting in. But anyway, as I say, the president was most gracious about this. And now all across America, there are some people that I owe a great debt of thanks to. There they are. They're meeting tonight in our national headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. The National Committee people, the dedicated professionals who've made the campaign run, and in every state, in the counties, the cities, and the precincts, to all of them who worked so tirelessly, literally hundreds of thousands of volunteers, and I've seen them at work throughout the country on this campaign. I just owe them an immeasurable debt of thanks. To George and Barbara Bush, our running mates down in Texas, no one has worked harder than they have. We only crossed paths a few times on this campaign and had to go out of our way to do it because their schedule was so heavy. And I can tell you that we're going to have a true partnership and a true friendship in the White House. And now, as I said before, my family. I'm so grateful to them for the love, for the support, and for the hard work, because some of them were out on the campaign trail easily as much as Nancy and I were. And speaking of Nancy, she's going to have a new title in a couple of months. It isn't really new because she's been the first lady in my life for a long time. Now, we'll share that a little bit in the future. You know, Abe Lincoln, the day after his election to the presidency, gathered in his office the newsmen who had been covering his campaign. And he said to them, "Well, boys, your troubles are over now. Mine have just begun." I think I know what he meant. Lincoln may have been concerned in the troubled times in which he became president, but I don't think he was afraid. He was ready to confront the problems, the troubles of a still youthful country, determined to seize the historic opportunity to change things. And I am not frightened by what lies ahead, and I don't believe the American people are frightened by what lies ahead. Together, we're going to do what has to be done. We're going to put America back to work again. You know, I aim to try and tap that great American spirit that opened up this completely undeveloped continent from coast to coast and made it a great nation, survived several wars, survived a Great Depression, and will survive the problems that we face right now. When I accepted your nomination for president, I hesitatingly, but I asked for your prayers at that moment. I won't ask them for this in particular moment, but I will just say I would be very happy to have them in the days ahead. All I can say to all of you is thank you And thank you for more than just George Bush and myself. Thank you because if the trend continues, we may very well control one house of the Congress for the first time in a quarter of a century. We have picked up some governorships, and Bill Brock told me on the phone just a few minutes ago that it looks like in a number of states we have turned the state legislatures around, and for the first time they are majorities for us. So you did it. I have one message that I have to give before I leave. I've been upstairs on the phone trying to get a hold of two celebrations, two parties that are going on, one in Tampico, Illinois, where I was born, and one in Dixon, Illinois, where I grew up. I've got two hometowns. And finally, we managed to get the radio station in that area, and they told us that they would broadcast my message into the two parties that are going on. So to all of them, thank you too, back there in the hometown. Thank you all.
And after a campaign that has lasted by some counts for 600 days, when the first candidate declared a run for the presidency for 2016, the major party nominees got out and voted today. Hillary Clinton with her husband and former President Bill Clinton voting in Chappaqua, New York, and Donald Trump also voting in New York. He was at PS 59. Here's a look.
Are you concerned about voter fraud?
We're always concerned about that.
We're going to go straight down the steps.
Okay.
Sorry. Guys, keep your distance. Let the shooter get in. Yep. Let security get in. Stand sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. I am your future president. Okay, I'm going to do that. So we'll leave that later, okay? How much is that? So we'll give you this. So you'll make a little profit, okay? Have a good time. Yeah, thank you. Have a good time, everybody. Did you vote? Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Trump, what are you hearing about early returns so far from your team?
Very good.
Very good?
Everything's very good.
Any states in particular?
Just very good, generally speaking. I'm going to go this way.
I'm guiding you a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Yep, I got you.
I'm good.
Okay.
Where are we going? This way?
Here you go. What you're going to do is fill out the ballot and one of the privacy books behind you. When you're done with that, you bring it to the scanner under the basketball net. Absolutely. You want to do like a sticker? Why not? Sticker. Thank you. Morning. 111.
Mr. Trump, do you have a final message to the people of America as they're voting?
Make America great.
I'm going to fill out the ballot.
How does this feel right now today to be at this moment?
And then really go to that.
It's a great honor.
Thank you so much.
Let's go.
Not nervous. I'm very excited. It's a great opportunity. This tremendous enthusiasm from everybody. You see it all over the country, all over the world. It's been a great feeling.
Jill, you gotta be back in the middle of this time.
Well, we want to win. We do want to win.
I'm trying.
112.
Thank you.
You're going to fill out the ballot in one of the privacy booths or there. And
I like your hair. I like that hair color.
Thank you so much. Once you're done, you're going to go to under the basketball hoop across there to scan it in. And here's your iPhone sticker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, your last name Kushner?
Did anybody get my quarter?
Keep going down, keep going down. What's that? Hey guys, can you go down? Gary, we're going to go. Go. Come on, guys.
That way. You're going that way.
Sorry, man. We're sorry.
Oh, sorry. Don't push, guys.
Russell, you okay? Come closer.
Yeah, I'm good.
You got a good angle?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
One moment, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Gucci, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Mike, can I come on the left side of you? Yes, sir. Thank you. You good? Good? Mike?
Okay, on distance, sir. Are you okay? Just let me know, okay?
So who did you vote for?
Tough decision. We'll just be around looking at them, seeing some people.
Excuse me. Are you a voter? I am with Mr. Trump. Guys, let's scoot back and let them go through.
You should be going back out the same way. Push these guys back.
Ronco, you'll come over here.
She's got it. All right.
Schedule a plan for tomorrow?
I sure do.
I'll let you know. Let's see what happens. It's looking very good. Right now.
Donald Trump voting earlier today with his wife, Melania, and members of his family in New York City. And we'll let you know tonight live coverage from Canada for an international perspective on the U.S. elections with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's election night coverage and their program, The National, hosted by Peter Mansbridge. We'll have that live starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 2.
Secretary Pate, good morning.
Good morning.
What has gone into place today to ensure an election that people can have confidence in?
Well, we've got 10,000 Iowans, our neighbors, both Republican and Democrats, who've been through various training programs, and they're going to be managing the polling sites. And we've got a lot of early voting that was done. We start our early voting 120 days out for some of our military and missionary folks who are in distant locations. Normal early voting's at 40 days out. So we've got over 600,000 early votes already cast, and the polls opened at 7 this morning and don't close till 9 tonight. So we're out and we're rocking.
One of the questions that this election is about voter fraud. How does Iowa prevent that from happening?
Well, we like to believe we have some pretty reliable checks and balances in place. We have online voter registration, which helps a lot because those folks who utilize that give us every opportunity to verify they are legitimate and eligible electors. My policy is I believe that we can have participation and we can also have integrity. They're not mutually exclusive. It's the challenge is to use technology so that we can do it in such a fashion we don't disenfranchise people, but we do have the safeguards to make sure that legitimate voters are the ones who get to cast a ballot.
When it comes to the machines themselves, what type of machines generally are used in Iowa, and how are they made secure for this day?
Well, our equipment is all certified by our office, but I can tell you we're a little old-fashioned. We vote still by paper ballot. We use technology for the counter itself, but we also have a mechanism to do a hand count should we question if the machines are doing their job properly. We don't vote on the Internet, and we don't vote by email. It's just the good old paper ballot. And, again, checks and balances. Everything we do it bipartisan. There's a Republican and Democrat poll workers working side by side.
When it comes to the stories today about concerns about, at some locations, about voter intimidation, how do you deal with that as far as the process plays out today?
Well, we have a pretty good policy in place that the only ones that are allowed to be hanging out at a polling site is the professional poll workers and the official poll watchers that are certified by both political parties. Anyone other than that are asked to leave. We have a 300-foot electioneering prohibition, so that keeps people to a distance. This should be a comfortable experience, and frankly, there's nothing wrong with it being a fun experience, too, so people can come in and show their support for the process and do it in such a fashion that nobody's going to hinder them or try to unduly influence.
Secretary Pate, how many registered voters are there in Iowa, and what do you think will be participation rate this cycle?
We're looking at breaking for the first time 2 million active voters. We have actually some others that were over 2 million, but unfortunately the federal laws do not allow us to always purge those lists. So we're probably looking at about 2 million real active voters. We think we're going to probably see somewhere around 70% of the registered voters participating. Again, the weather's great here. People have got a lot of information. Polling sites are open, and I think the both political parties are hitting it pretty hard, and I think the non-party folks are hitting it pretty hard. So we'll see some people out there voting today.
And how much participation have you had from early voting?
Early voting, we've about 600,000. We're down some from 4 years ago. The Republicans are up by about 2,000 compared to 4 years ago. The Democrats are down about 20,000, and the No Party are down about 20,000. So there's been a little slower start getting out of the gate, I think. Frankly, this has been a very unusual presidential cycle. I think most Americans will attest to that.
Paul Pate is the Secretary of State, Republican Secretary of State for the state of Iowa, joining us to talk about their preparations on this election day. Secretary Pate, thanks for your time.
Very good. Be a voter.
Election night, tonight on C-SPAN. Watch the results and be part of a national conversation about the outcome. Be on location at the Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump election night headquarters and watch victory and concession speeches in key Senate, House, and governor's races. starting live at 8 p.m. Eastern and throughout Wednesday. Watch live tonight on C-SPAN, on demand at cspan.org, or listen to our live coverage using the free C-SPAN radio app.
And our Sunday Roundtable focusing on religion and politics. We want to welcome Elizabeth Wydra. She is the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, which is what?
We are a nonprofit law firm, think tank, and action center in the public interest that focuses on promoting the progressive promise of the Constitution. So we do that through Supreme Court litigation in the lower courts, and we focus on issues that range across the constitutional portfolio, whether it's race and criminal justice, the environment, federalism, marriage equality, affirmative action, immigration. We do the whole spectrum, and we also focus on judicial nominations, something that is obviously of important interest right now.
Which we'll be talking about. Eric Baxter is senior counsel for the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. Explain your organization.
Beckett Fund is a public interest law firm. We represent people of all faiths from A to Z, Anglicans to Zoroastrians. We've recently defended the right of Sikhs to serve in the military without giving up their articles of faith, the rights of a Muslim prisoner to wear a beard for religious reasons in prison. We recently defended the Little Sisters of the Poor and their right to provide conscience-compliant health care. We believe that religious freedom is essential to human dignity, and so we proudly defend the religious liberty of all people of all faiths in the federal courts.
So, Elizabeth Wydra, let me get your reaction to this tweet from Niels Lesniewski and something that is happening in churches around the country on this Sunday. An appeal from Mike Pence, an evangelical, former Catholic, who has talked about being born again, and he is the Republican vice presidential nominee. Your reaction to that? His appeal to churches around the country.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he was going to give that appeal.
Well, he is doing it this morning.
Okay.
This is the tweet from Niels Lesniewski.
Yeah, I think that obviously, the places where people come together and congregate are places where they can talk about, issues. Where we get into a little bit of trouble is the fact that churches, like many other charitable organizations, are tax exempt under the tax code, which means that not only do they not have to pay income tax on their own income, but that people who make donations to those churches and other charitable organizations can deduct those donations from their taxes. And what that means is that the government basically is saying, we will give you this tax subsidy, but in return, we're not going to subsidize explicitly political activity, so not campaigning explicitly for or against a particular candidate, for or against a particular legislative measure. Obviously, you can still talk about the important issues, but just not engage in actual electioneering, because the government has said, we don't want to subsidize that political speech. We want to subsidize all the other great works that you do in the public interest.
Well, let me take that one step further and get your reaction. That dates back to 1954, when Lyndon Johnson, then a senator from Texas, put forth the Johnson Amendment. We should point out he was running for re-election to the U.S. Senate. It reads as follows. It does bar tax-exempt charitable groups, which the IRS calls 501c3 organizations, from endorsing candidates and getting involved in political campaigns because churches fall under Section 501c3 of the tax code. The ban applies to them as well.
So it's absurd to think that we would give the IRS power to penalize religious organizations for speaking their mind on important religious issues. Religious leaders throughout our history, since the American Revolution, have spoken truth to power on issues abolishing slavery, racial equality, defending, or promoting prison rehabilitation programs, helping the homeless. All of these things religions do, and other tax-exempt organizations, are an enormous benefit to taxpayers in our country. And we shouldn't be giving the IRS power to censor sermons when they think that a church or religious leader has crossed some vague line about what's politically acceptable or not. When ministers or preachers or moms, rabbis are speaking to their congregations about religious issues, whether that involves political candidates or not, they should be free from the threat of the IRS punishing them for their political views.
And of course, to read the U.S. Constitution, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government as a redress of their grievances.
Yeah, that's, exactly right. And this kind of what we talk about, the wall of separation between church and state, going back to the founding up through conservative statements at the Supreme Court, is there not just to ensure that there is not an establishment of religion that might prefer one religion over another and do something other than welcome the diversity of faiths that we have in this country. It's not just there for that. It's also there to, frankly, to protect religion. The idea was that you wanted to have this separation not just to keep religion from infiltrating the government, but also to keep the government from tainting the religious sphere. And, I think it's interesting that Eric talked about all those great ways in which the churches have helped move our country further on our arc of progress, like the religious work toward racial equality, abolishing slavery, and fighting against Jim Crow laws, et cetera, in the civil rights movement. There's absolutely nothing in the 501c3 tax exemption that says they can't argue for racial equality. It's really this more explicit political activity of arguing for or against a particular candidate. And that's where we see, the courts saying that it's constitutional to have this bargain where you get to, if you want to have tax exempt donations to your organization, whether it's a church or another organization. There are lots of 501c3 organizations that are not religious as well, but that are engaged in public interest work for other reasons. If you want to get those donations to be tax deductible, then you can't engage in this explicitly political speech. You can certainly engage in that conversation in your personal capacity, or if you choose to organize under a different provision of the tax code. But if you want this particular tax subsidy, that's the way that the tax code has been written, and it's been upheld by the courts as constitutional.
I'm going to come back to that point and get your reaction, but first, here's what the candidates have been saying. We'll begin with Donald Trump on September the 21st. He was in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Here are his comments.
You do right every day by your community and your family. You raise children in the light of God. I will always support your church and defend your right to worship, always. I will always be there. I am here today to listen to your message, and I hope my presence here will help, and very much help, your voice to reach new audiences. It's going to happen in our country. And these are people, believe me, many people out there that desperately need it. Christian faith is not the past, but the present and the future. It is the foundation of progress. And I pledge to you that if I win, some people say if and when, let's say if, because we have to be realistic, close race. But if you all go out and vote, we're going to win. But I pledge to you that we're going to end the Johnson Amendment, which takes away the voice of your pastors, your ministers, your great leaders, takes away their voice. We're going to end quickly the Johnson.
Again, the Johnson Amendment, which passed in 1954, put together by then Senator Lyndon Johnson. And in the final debate that took place in Las Vegas, Nevada, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic nominee, had this to say.
I think when we talk about the Supreme Court, it really raises the central issue in this election. Namely, what kind of country are we going to be? What kind of opportunities will we provide for our citizens? What kind of rights will Americans have? And I feel strongly that the Supreme Court needs to stand on the side of the American people, not on the side of the powerful, corporations, and the wealthy. For me, that means that we need a Supreme Court that will stand up on behalf of women's rights, on behalf of the rights of the LGBT community, that will stand up and say no to Citizens United, a decision that has undermined the election system in our country because of the way it permits dark, unaccountable money to come into our electoral system. I have major disagreements with my opponent about these issues and others that will be before the Supreme Court. But I feel that at this point in our country's history, it is important that we not reverse marriage equality, that we not reverse Roe v. Wade, that we stand up against Citizens United, we stand up for the rights of people in the workplace, that we stand up and basically say, The Supreme Court should represent all of us. That's how I see the court, and the kind of people that I would be looking to nominate to the court would be in the great tradition of standing up to the powerful, standing up on behalf of our rights as Americans.
Some of the constitutional legal issues that were framed in the final debate by Hillary Clinton. These comments from our viewers: why is it not okay for churches to endorse a political party, but okay for university professors and employers and unions and others to do so? Another comment saying churches can play politics from the pulpit, just take away their tax-exempt status, better yet, end all tax-exempt businesses. And finally, this from Dee Dee: the Constitution does not say separation of church and state. The First Amendment intended to keep government out of religion and prevent a strong religion. So a lot here on the table. Let me get your reaction to all of this first. Eric Baxter from the Beckett Fund.
Yeah, it's absurd to think that churches need the IRS to protect their interests. You know, the Establishment Clause is there to protect, create some space between government and religion. But that is violated when the IRS is given power to go in and decide what ministers can and cannot say in their congregations on religiously important issues. Tax-exempt, again, tax-exempt organizations are given tax-exempt status because of the great social work they give, saves taxpayers money, provide amazing social services in our country. And we should keep that completely separate from this idea of what the political views of are these organizations. With all the IRS abuses we've experienced recently, who would want the IRS to have the power to censor sermons? If you think about the iconic moment in American history when Martin Luther King was arrested during the Nixon-Kennedy campaign, and his wife pleaded with both candidates to support him publicly. Nixon refused, Kennedy agreed, and Martin Luther King's father publicly announced that he was switching his vote from Nixon to Kennedy because of Kennedy's reaction, and announced that he had a congregation who was willing to follow his beliefs too. Now, should he have had his tax-exempt status stripped? Of course not. And it would have been a violation of the Constitution if the IRS had taken that. So they should not have this power to censor sermons of religious leaders.
So you have Governor Mike Pence making an appeal to evangelical churches. You have Democrats having what they call the souls to the polls, getting African Americans predominantly to the polling places. Right or wrong?
Absolutely. Candidates should feel free to appeal to all groups of people in our country, and they should not be prohibited because of someone's religious status from engaging fully in the political process.
Elizabeth Wydra.
Yeah, I think I think Eric might be conflating a couple issues. There's nothing wrong, absolutely, with churches speaking out on the issues and having people of all ideological bents coming to speak about particular issues. The problem, again, is when it comes to specific electioneering, and that's what the tax code 501c3 says, that there will not be taxpayer subsidy for particular political electioneering by churches or any 501c3 organization, but you don't have to organize as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. And again, you can speak out about all of the other range of important values and issues that are in the national debate today. You can have people from all ideological perspectives, if they're elected or not, as long as you're not doing explicit electioneering on that front. And I think we saw an example of this when Donald Trump came to the church to talk about Flint, Michigan and the water crisis there, and he was welcomed to speak about those issues, but when he tried to turn it into a political speech attacking Secretary Clinton, the pastor got up and said, that's actually not why you're here. And I think that's kind of a good distinction. It's certainly great for the debate to have these community organizations, including churches, such a vital part of this country, engage in national debate, but because the idea is you don't want to have taxpayers subsidizing the political activity, which many taxpayers might disagree with, of particular 501c3 organizations, that's where you draw the line. And there isn't this censorship of sermons. No IRS agent is sitting in the back pew listening for, doctrinal differences. That's not at all what they're doing. The guidelines are actually quite clear about, you cannot engage in explicit electioneering. And that kind of bright line, I think, protects from having this extreme government involvement. And frankly, we haven't seen that actually happen.
Elizabeth Wydra, who is the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and Eric Baxter, who serves as senior counsel for the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. Our topic, religion in politics and campaigns. Let's get to your phone calls. A reminder, you can send us a tweet at C-SPAN WJ. Regina, very patient, waiting from Kansas City, Missouri, Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning. I am a Bible believer. I don't have a particular religion, and I do not wish for any pastor to be involved with a 501(c)(3). And my opinion about my beliefs is God is my provider, not the government. And that's the difference between believers and unbelievers. Believers believe God is our Father and provider. Unbelievers believe the government can do everything for us. That's God's place. And another thing is they have added the word political to sin. Therefore, it changes the pastor's message, which is totally unconstitutional. It is the pastor's right to speak against sin in that pulpit. And if he wants to say this person is a sinner for saying these things, for saying that you can kill a baby up to the 9 months, then that is his constitutional right and the right to be left alone for free speech within and without the four walls of the church.
Regina, thank you for the call. Elizabeth Wydra.
Yeah, so thank you, Regina, for that call. Obviously, pastors do and can, even if they're organized as a 501c3, speak about some of the important issues you talked about particularly about abortion. Churches are certainly free and frequently do speak about and advocate about abortion issues. They can also speak about a whole host of other controversial issues, like marriage equality, for example. Again, the distinction is just on the explicit electioneering if you're organized as a 501c3. There are other ways that you can get tax-exempt status. You could be a 501c4, for example, which is some of these more political organizations. They're still tax-exempt, but donations to those organizations do not get to be deducted from your own personal income taxes. And I think it's important to think about what happens if we were to have political donations be tax deductible to 501c3s. Generally, tax deductions are something that benefit those who take itemized deductions, who are generally the more wealthier among us. And that would essentially be taxpayer subsidization for wealthier Americans' political speech. And I think that when we think about what we want our tax code to encourage or not, that's not really something that we need to encourage, to have wealthy special interests have more of an influence on our politics.
Can you explain question 790 in Oklahoma? Because right now the Constitution in the state in Oklahoma forbids public funds to be used for religious purposes, and so voters in that state are going to decide if that should be repealed.
Absolutely. So question 790 involves the Oklahoma Blaine Amendment. We were talking about the Johnson Amendment, which was enacted proposed by Senator Johnson, specifically to target his political opponents. It was not debated. It was sneaked into a bill. He was targeting nonprofit organizations that had fought against his election. And the Blaine amendments were very similar. In the 1850s, they were, the Supreme Court has acknowledged they arose out of anti-Catholic bias during the period of the nativist Know Nothing Party in the United States. And they're basically amendments in state constitutions that are used to bar religious organizations from partnering with the government on equal terms with every other organization. So religious organizations provide, countless social services. A recent study out of Georgetown found that there was $1.2 trillion added to the economy because of the services of religious organizations. Hundreds of thousands of programs serving people with HIV/AIDS, with alcohol addiction, with mental illnesses, all out of congregations in the U.S. And to suggest that these organizations should not be able to partner with the government on the same terms as every other social service provider is really a violation of the Establishment Clause. So question 790 out of Oklahoma is an effort to repeal that provision, the Blaine Amendment from the Oklahoma Constitution.
And your thoughts on this?
So my understanding from the debate over 790 is that a lot of it has to do with the placement of a Ten Commandments monument. And I think not only do you have the Oklahoma Supreme Court's guidance suggesting that giving state funds for such a purpose would violate the Oklahoma Constitution, but we also have to think about the federal Constitution. You read the majestic words of the First Amendment earlier in this segment, and state constitutions can add to the protections of the federal Constitution. They can legislate in areas where the federal Constitution does not speak to those areas. But the federal Constitution prevents states from going lower than sort of the minimum of rights protections set by the federal Constitution. So I think that the concern would be that even if you change the Oklahoma Constitution, that change in the Oklahoma Constitution could violate the federal Constitution. We've had the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, say that Ten Commandments monuments on public grounds are unconstitutional if they're for an explicitly religious purpose. They've allowed them when it's part of a historical display about the role of the Ten Commandments in creating our civic morality as part of the history of this country. But if it's for explicitly religious reasons, that violates the federal Constitution.
And here are the words of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution as we listen to Catherine. She's calling from Springfield, Massachusetts, on the Democrats' line. Good morning.
Good morning. Matthew, in the book of Matthew, in the 17th chapter, explains everything. One of the tax collectors asked Peter, do your master pay taxes? And he said, yes. As Peter came into the house, and he asked them, what do they want? Taxes. Whom do they pay taxes? Strangers or their own? And he told me to go take a hook, go down to the sea, and get a coin and pay for me and you. Y'all sure pay taxes. Now, why shouldn't his church pay taxes? His church is not ahead of him. They have ripped his head off and have put Caesar over their churches, and that's the reason why the churches don't have no power. They got no business interfering because he told Pilate, my kingdom is not this world. If it was, my son would fight for me, and we are in his kingdom, and nobody's kingdom supersedes his kingdom. I don't blame the government. I blame these greedy pastors. They did that thing, and all they do, they don't feed the flock, they feast the flock.
Catherine, I'm going to stop you there. You put your issues on the table. Thank you very much. I want to just also share a tweet from a viewer who's saying, this is from Vivian, who says, the IRS does not have the power to control religious speech. They control their tax status. Tax exempt means no politics in church. So a lot of passion here from the viewer and from Vivian. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so this idea that there's some bright line that's really easy for the IRS to enforce is really false. The law says that religious organization and other tax-exempt organizations cannot participate directly or indirectly in any campaign by a political candidate. And there's actually a committee at the IRS called the Political Activities Referral Committee that actually does have power to review sermons of pastors and determine if they have crossed the line or not. So this idea that there's some clear line is just false. And Ms. Weiser suggested that you could just form a 501c4 instead of a 501c3. So what's happened is you've created a system where those who have enough money to hire the right lawyers and the right lobbyists, they're able to speak out on these issues without fear of what's going to happen to them. But your local community churches are all very concerned that if they speak out on these issues, they will be targeted by the IRS. And there's no reason, in the example that Ms. Weiser gave earlier, pastors, yes, are absolutely free to stand up and tell candidates that certain things are not acceptable in their congregation. Members of congregations are free to stop going to churches or donating to churches. But we shouldn't have the IRS being the arbitrator of those issues.
A comment and then a question for you. This is from Maverick, who says, the problem with that caller saying pastors calling out sinners, it's not up to them. Identifying sin is one thing, damnation is another. So you can share your tweet, your comments at C-SPAN WJ. And then this question from Faye. If LBJ passed the amendment in 1954, why not strictly enforced until after 1995?
I'm not sure that it wasn't enforced. I think that in some ways it just wasn't terrifically controversial, actually. There wasn't a lot of debate on the amendment at the time. And, I think that as we've had a greater influence of political money in politics, big money in politics, that concern has grown a little bit more in the wake of trying to ensure that the way that we donate to campaigns is more transparent than other ways where you can not disclose who your donors are, and that's where a lot of these other organizations come into play. The IRS governs its tax code, and so we have choices. That's one of the great things about this country. If you want to get the benefits of tax exemption, then I think it's really only fair and makes sense that you would then be subject to the tax code. That's kind of how things work. And If you don't want to be a tax-exempt organization, you certainly don't have to be. If you want to organize under a different part, presumably that you would need the same lawyers to be a 501c3 or a 501c4, but I'm not a tax lawyer, so I can't speak to that. You have those options. There are options out there for you, and that is why the courts have upheld the Johnson Amendment and the 501c3 status, is because you can choose whether or not to get this very important subsidy that allows churches and other charitable organizations to continue to do their very good social works, but does not engage explicitly in electioneering.
Every Sunday, we welcome our viewers on the BBC Parliament channel and our listeners on Sirius XM, channel 124, the POTUS channel, which simulcasts C-SPAN's Washington Journal. And our focus for this segment is religion and politics with Elizabeth Wydra. She is the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and Eric Baxter, who is senior counsel for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. Very quickly, if people want to go to your website, where do they go?
www.becketfund.org.
And we are at theusconstitution.org, and on Twitter, at myconstitution. I'm at Elizabeth Wydra.
And let's go to Thomas at Humble, Texas, actually in Humble, Texas. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hey, America is great. Listen, Elizabeth, would you repeal Citizens United? And Eric, what does the Clinton Foundation do? Thank you.
What does the Clinton Foundation do?
Oh, I think that was a question.
Oh,
for
I'm sorry. Did you want?
Eric?
Yes, I apologize.
But I'm happy to talk about Citizens United.
Yeah, I don't really have a comment on the Clinton Foundation. I would like to attack this idea that somehow by giving tax-exempt status, the government is subsidizing political speech. In this country, by default, we are only taxed when we tell the government to tax us. It's not a gift when the government doesn't tax us. And so once we've decided that organizations that perform certain social benefits for society should be tax exempt because of the enormous benefit they bring to the American taxpayer and to vulnerable populations, it would violate the Establishment Clause to then say, okay, but we're only going to not tax you if you agree to our political view of things. Those should be kept completely separate. The IRS should not be in the business ever of having power to tell religious leaders what they should or should not be saying in their congregations on important issues of moral concern.
So from Camille Joyner saying churches can get out from under the thumb of the IRS with no exemption, do they necessarily need to be tax exempt?
Like I said, again, tax-exempt organizations, including churches, and especially churches, provide enormous social services to our society. And that we as a people have chosen to encourage that by giving them tax-exempt status and allowing people who donate to these organizations to deduct their contributions from their income that would be taxed otherwise. So again, once we've made that decision, we shouldn't punish religious organizations that meet the criteria because we don't agree with their politics. I mean, if a church wants to speak out about the moral character of a political candidate, I don't see how anybody could like the idea of the IRS then deciding whether that is direct or indirect participation in that politician's campaign.
Eric Baxter, who's a graduate of Brigham Young University, and Elizabeth Wydra, who earned her law degree from Yale University. Matthew from Rossville, Georgia, Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning. When you go to church, for those who go to church, and they listen to the pastor, he's not a dictator. He tells his sermon, he tells what he has to say, and the people either believe him or don't believe him. So it's not like a dictatorship. When we came up with the difference between church and state, it was because we left England back to come to America. And England had a thing that everybody was a member of the Church of England, whether you believed or not, and you got in trouble if you went against what the church was saying. When we came to America, there was a difference between the government telling the people what to say, and that's what the difference between the church and state was, that the government didn't force everybody to become Baptist or Catholic or Church of God or Pentecostal or Muslim or atheist. The government didn't force people to become what they were.
So, Matthew, would you agree or disagree? As you're giving your comments, Stan had this tweet that may mirror your own thoughts. He says, what is the difference between someone's religion and someone's point of view or philosophy of life?
I believe that in these last days, and I believe Clinton's going to try to tax all churches. believing in the different things, as somebody that believes in God and believes the scriptures, believing. Are you still there?
We sure are.
Okay. But it's a personal belief. And for somebody to force you to believe something, even if you don't believe it, is what the difference between church and state was trying to set up.
Okay, we'll get a response.
Yeah,
You're smiling.
Yeah, no, I